What's up, guys? It's Bart Hanson for Crush Live Poker, and I recently played a session on the Lodge live stream, and I was asked about this specific hand from last week. So what I'm going to do is put this up on YouTube, and this is an exact piece of the training video that I used for this week going over this particular hand. So if you like what you see here, you can check out the description and you get training videos like this every single week from me on Crush Live Poker, mainly reviewing my own play and some of the other players that I will play against commonly. Do me a favor, if you do like this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's start it off here. And I touched on this in the podcast this week about response to sort of small sizing and how you will sometimes see a spaz response to small sizing. So this is one that a lot of people want me to take a look at. So it's going to get folded over here around to me. I've got ace-8 offsuit here, and I'm going to bring it in for a raise at 5-5-10. And this one actually has got a double straddle. We talked about this a little bit too over the last few weeks. Even though I'm on the button, I'm going to have positions against these guys. It's still 4 unseen hands, which is different than a 2-blind game where you're just on the button and everyone's folded and you only have 2 unseen hands. So this should probably be a tighter open than just a traditional button open. I think it would probably be a little bit nitty, as loose as this game was going here, to not open ace-8 off though here on the button. So I make it 65 over 5-5-10-20. And this guy's played like an incredibly loose passive style here. Joe, who's a reg, and then Jwin, who's also a reg, is going to make the call. And you can see that here that Jwin has 6,700. And of course, Jwin is the guy that made the incredible laydown with bottom full house against Sue's quads, which was covered on YouTube, and it will be at the back of one of these CLP videos as well. So this is the same guy. So he makes the call here with 10-7 offsuit. And the pot's 205, and we go to the flop here, and you can see it's Jack 8-5 here with a couple of diamonds. So Joe and Jwin check. One of the things that I would say that sometimes people will wash over a little bit is that when you are playing against opponents that have incredibly high VPIPs, like a lot of these players do, they're going to miss a lot of the time. And also, they're not necessarily going to have a hand that has equity on sort of a traditional board that might hit them just because they have a very, very high volume of hands. I mean, neither probably of these hands should be played in this particular spot. Now, I've got middle pair here with an ace kicker. I do think that my hand definitely needs protection. I do think that I can get called by worse. I can get called by gut shots. I can get called by draws. Obviously, somebody could have a jack, but multi-way, newer school thought in terms of sizing, I don't really have to bet that large. And I knew this going in, that if I was going to throw in some small sizing, like I'm going to do here of 55, which is about 25% of the pot, there was a very, very high chance that I was going to have to defend down, because just the sheer small bet sizing in a game like this, where a lot of these players are not accustomed to that bet sizing, is going to induce some sort of spaz raises that are spaz raises that are using hands that should not be raises, like in a given scenario. And I talked about this earlier on the podcast here too. So I bet 55, this guy folds, and here we go. Right away, I'm like, wow, I could kind of see it like working in his head. Jwin here is going to check raise here. So 55 here up to 205. Now he does have, obviously he has a gut shot. He does have some backdoor straightening possibilities here as well with the 7. Obviously the best 10-7 hand to do this would be like 10-7 of diamonds, followed by 10-7 of clubs, and then maybe having a diamond in your hand. I think that this is pretty optimistic with just a sort of a bare offsuit gut shot. But this is what I'm talking about. I was totally prepared here to defend down, at least for one street, depending obviously on what the turn is here with second pair. And again, when you get into a scenario where you have this sort of 5-out hand to improve, what I'm talking about is I have a pair and, obviously 3 outs for a kicker. That can sometimes be better than actually having a pocket pair in your hand. 9s and 10s, it's not the best example if we had 9s and 10s because we can pick up like a gut shot. But Ace 8 here is going to have more equity to the end than like a hand like 9s and 10s. And if you were to look at a different board, like a Jack 4, like Jack 6 deuce, or something like that, and maybe you made an equity protection bet with 8s on Jack 6 deuce, or you made an equity protection bet with like 5-6 suited with a backdoor flush draw. If your opponent is basically representing a Jack plus for his value range, I would rather have the 5-6 suited with the backdoor. You could have as many as 6 outs, including the backdoor flush draw, and sometimes even have a backdoor straight draw for half an out, versus like having a pair of 8s or 7s on Jack 6 deuce where you only have 2 outs to improve. So that's why, betting with a pair and sort of a live kicker, these types of hands are much easier to defend down with, as opposed to a pocket pair, which might be like second pair to the board or something like that. So obviously here, I'm going to make the call. A pretty easy call here for me. So now the pot's 605, and some of the really, really bad cards here that I can see obviously would be diamonds. This is one of them, right? King of diamonds. So maybe the other ones are like the 7 of diamonds or the queen of diamonds that kind of fit into like the 9-10 and also like bring in diamonds. Here, obviously it's a diamond, but it doesn't complete any of the straights. There's lots of different straight draws out here on Jack 8-5. There's 9-10, there's 9-7, which is actually a double gutter. All kinds of gut shots, right? 6-9, 10-7. You can just basically go down the line. So if I was expecting this raise to be a little bit bluff heavy, just because this is a king of diamonds doesn't necessarily mean it does anything for his hand. Sure, he'll have some flushes, but what I found interesting here on the turn, even though this is one of the worst cards, right, that I can see on the deck, is that Jaywin used a rather large sizing here on the turn, and this was really the critical point of the hand here for me. And a lot of people sort of question, like, how do you continue here on the turn? So he's going to bet 400 here. And here's my argument in this particular spot. Even at 2/3 turn pot size bet here, 400 into 605, I think that this scenario is so extreme, and it also has to do with the fact that there's an overcard to what was top pair on the flop. This is almost a flush or nothing at all. Tell me the value hands that are taken for this line. They continue here for this sizing of 400 on the turn. I would say it's probably not King Jack. Obviously, I block pocket 8s. I would think that Jack would be 3-bet off as a squeeze right from the straddle most of the time. And then you look at it, it's like, okay, 5-5. Is he going to continue here with a set 5-5? Maybe. But if he has all these other bluff hands in here too, so maybe he has a tiny, tiny bit of non-flush value, very few combos, but still has a lot of bluffs in the forms of straight draw. Obviously, I would like to have a diamond in my hand, just in case that I can improve. But I thought that it would appear to me to look like a pretty good scare card for him to represent. But the fact that it's an overcard to the Jack, and for those reasons where that sizing, I just don't see much value here. That is not a flush. Very few combos. Obviously, he could have a flush too, but he's got a bunch of other bluffs here as well, which is why I decided to continue on. I mean, it was definitely a close decision for me, and this is not probably anywhere near optimal by any sense of the imagination. You would just basically fold out here, but this was an exploit. This is exactly what I was thinking of. Now we get to a very, very interesting river, which another people had like a big question for me on what I did. The river's an 8, so I trip up here, right? I've got ace 8, I've got trip 8s, which with what he is representing for value actually doesn't really change anything. What it changes is less possible sort of full house combinations that might consist of having like 8x, even though I think that that's really, really unlikely, because in order for him to have a full house that consists of 8x here, he would have to have 2 pair on the turn. We just talked about that. Like, what kind of sizing is this on the turn? Like, you flop bottom 2, he's going to plow through here on the turn with an overcard king of diamonds for 400. I just didn't really buy it. So I make trips, but I really don't think that it really affects the hand all that much, besides now beating like King Jack, which I still question if he takes that type of sizing. Now, you guys know that I preach and I am the thinnest value bettor in the world, especially in live games on the river. That is really where you make your bread and butter. But there are very, very extreme situations where you should be checking back what appears to be a strong hand, like I have here, because of the nature of what your opponent here is representing. And if I think that almost all of his value on the turn, and I'm only really concerned about his value, right? Because if he has a bluff and he's giving up, he's just going to fold. Okay? So if almost all of his value on the turn is flushes, then there really is no point for me to make this bet here because all his bluffs are just going to fold. And I will see sometimes people get scared and check from up front with flushes when the board pairs. So there's always a chance that you very well might actually value own yourself if you bet trips. And I've made thin value bets with like one pair on one liner to straights and 3-bet pots all the way through, 3-bet, all 3 streets. But in this particular example, tell me what I am getting value from, consistent with what I think his hand range is based upon his turn bet and his flop check raise. Again, I disagree that he has many king jacks here. Maybe once in a while he might have one or two, and he maybe checks it here because he's scared of aces or a flush. Remember, king jack beats ace king. I mean, the only thing that an 8 does here at the end is he loses to aces, right? So when he takes that kind of polarizing sizing on the turn that basically says, hey, I'm representing a flush here, and now he checks the river, he's just going to fold out everything that's not a flush, which is all a bluff. And then once in a while, I might actually value own myself against a flush that's basically checked here from up front. So in real time, I actually said, I'm going to make a really, really nitty check here and check this back. So that's exactly what I did. And like I said, when you look at it on paper, you're like, oh my God, how did he not bet ace 8 here? Of course, J1 turns over 10-7 for air. So obviously he wouldn't have called. Now, there's one other thing that you can do here, which I've rarely implemented in live play, which is you can kind of throw out a bet in position here that's trying to induce some sort of spaz raise. Like you could bet like 50 or 100 and then have the intention to call off to a check raise, basically. There is that play that can sometimes be in the arsenal, but I thought that it was going to be much, much better here to basically just check this back. And I will add to sort of what I had said in my tweets from a couple of weeks ago where I said, well, I like to fast roll my hand. When someone tells me good call, I don't wait for them to turn it over. I think that's ridiculous. I just turn my hand over. But this is actually a little technique where you don't have to do anything to actually see your opponent's hand. Like he checked, I checked it back. He's got to roll over his hand first or he can muck. That's much, much different than you making a hero call, someone saying good call, and you're not fast rolling your hand over. You're just sort of waiting for them to turn over their bluff combo, which I think is just absurd. And again, this is why you never see any of the top players do it at the highest level games, especially to a recreational player. Yeah, just check. He turns over 10-7, and obviously I'm good. But on the surface, it's like, oh, why don't you bet, trip 8s?